Good morning. My name is, for those of you who don't know me, Danny Veerkamp. I'll be talking today very similar to Miriam. She covered a lot of the ground for me, took a lot of the material out of my presentation. So if I'm done in 2 minutes, it's because she covered it all quite nicely. I'm talking about a better way, and what I found is and view as a better way of doing business. And when trying to think about how I'm going to set up my presentation and how I'm going to go through it, I realized my natural way is by telling stories. And all good stories have beginning, middle, and end. And so think about what the beginning is for me and what the middle is and what that last part is. And for me, the beginning is where I realized I needed the tools and skills and experience to explain what I knew in my heart was a better way of doing business, that treating employees as individual people and with the respect, all of that respect that's involved in it is important. And how I gathered the strength to begin that journey to gain that learning. The middle, I'll talk about how I started learning about sustainable business and making some discoveries about myself along the way that I didn't realize were in there. And finally, at the end, I'll talk about how, in doing my practicum research and trying to put everything together, I realized that the most successful managers and some of the most successful organizations that treat employees this way are those that make themselves obsolete. And by that I mean that the managers manage themselves out of a job. They manage their organization so well that they're not needed anymore. They can step back and it can still function without them. So the beginning, as I said, I've got a beginning, middle, and end. About 8 years ago, I was working for a custom manufacturing shop, and it was owned by a business owner that very much viewed employees as cogs in a machine. And he even said that the employees are just like a machine part. If a machine part wears out or breaks or isn't performing properly to spec, you get rid of it and you get a new one. And so he drove his people in that fashion. Just drive it, run it. And if you try to make the analogy, well, you need to do maintenance on the machine to keep it running, it still didn't matter. It was just a throwaway way of doing business. And as a project manager, I was taking on more and more responsibilities and doing more and more work. And the more I'd take on, the more they would give on to me. And the more work I did, the more responsibility I had. To where it ended up that they said, you need to be in charge of everything. And so I'm trying to juggle all these balls and keep them in the air. And there's one particular day that is really the impetus for my shift. And it was one of those days that was a hard day at work. Every project I had was falling apart. Employees that I was working for were upset with me. Customers were upset with me. Suppliers were upset with me. Our financial people were upset with me. The boss is saying, hey, why isn't everything's going wrong? Why aren't you doing this the right way? And you're not on top of things. You're not controlling it. You need to work harder. And I was in the midst of this just terrible, terrible day. And so right around lunchtime, I get an email from friends of ours, and I get this picture. And this is Gray. Gray was born with half a heart. Excuse me. It's a syndrome called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And in the midst of my bad day, this picture of Gray, 3 years old. This is his 4th open heart surgery. And he looks better in this picture than I've ever seen him before. He has color, he has life. And I realized my bad day is nothing. This is a great day for this family. Their son just had his heart ripped open. And they're having a great day. And so that pushed me to think, what am I doing here? What's the point of this working and working and working when I don't have real problems? I've got some customers that are mad at me and some employees that are trying to do their work. I've got a boss that wants to make money, wants me to work harder. And so what do? It seemed like the only thing to do. I told them this wasn't going to work out. And they were like, what do you mean it's not going to work out? Are you firing us? I'm like, yeah, I'm quitting. I'm leaving. And so I left and started trying to figure out what's the next step? What do I do next? And so trying to start my own business, work on my own, I realized I knew what a better way was in my heart, but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to talk about it. And how was I going to talk about that? And I needed the skills and experience that I had talked about before. So I enrolled in Antioch. And it had been a while since I'd been in undergraduate school, and so there's a transition of, oh, how do you do this learning thing? How do you do this with a family? How do you do this while working a full-time job? How do you, what are all these things you're supposed to learn? And one of the things that I found out about myself is I loved finance. I didn't think I liked numbers. I thought I would get in this MBA program and I would take the finance classes and I'll get them over with, I'll get them done, then I'll get some really cool stuff about leadership and change. And I had Peter is teaching us finance, and I've realized this stuff is really cool. This numbers thing, that's fascinating. And so that came to the time for Practicum, and I have to decide what my Practicum project is going to be. And so how do I take these two things where I love finance and I love the numbers and I love how that people side of people, planet, profit is so valuable, and how do I combine the two, and what options are there? Where's the intersection of those two things? And like Miriam, I found that intersection in worker cooperatives, and a place that has that as baseline. They're going to care for the employees because the employees own the company. And they still need, just like every other business, they need financing. They need to be able to run their company. Miriam talked about a slide from Equal Exchange, and I got this from Dan Fireside, the capital coordinator at Equal Exchange. And they have graphics where they talk about how they raise their money and how the employees run the business. And a lot of worker cooperatives have the employees up on the right side, the worker owners at Equal Exchange hire the board of directors and sit on the board of directors, who then hire the CEOs that run the company, who then hire the employees, but they're also employees. And so that chain keeps going around. If you bring in outside financing, that chain gets broken. If it's the traditional way of financing, because those financiers want to sit on the board, or they want a part of the ownership of the company, which you can't give with a worker cooperative. So Equal Exchange, Real Pickles, and there's some very smart people have come up with ways to raise money where you give near equity shares to people or sell near equity shares. Those people get a return on their investment, the lower return because they're looking for a social, environmental return on their investment as well as an economic return. But the ownership and control of the company still stays inside the company. So spending the first semester, looking at that, looking at cooperatives and finding out how they raise their money and how they get that money, other than what traditional businesses do. I came to the beginning of this semester, and it's how do you make a project out of that? How do you take what your research and your academic thing is, and how do you find some way to tell people what you've been learning and put those skills to use? I had a couple ideas. None of them were really working right until I was having lunch with a friend in town who is an owner of a regional business. And they are a very heavily socially minded business. And I had talked to him a few times over the previous year about my projects and what I was learning. And he was fascinated with the idea of employee ownership. And one of the ideas in his company is that the current owners is family-owned business. And they wanted to see what would be involved to make a transition to some form of worker employee ownership component. He said, as he put it to me, we have plenty of time, or plenty of good ideas, but not enough time to follow through on all of them. And asked if he could hand that idea to me and let me spend my time working on it. And so I thought, sure, sounds like a Practicum project ready to go. And so I started looking through it, and first, immediately, because my research was directly on employee-owned cooperatives, looking at example cooperatives that I thought kind of matched their mission or their transition and what it was that they were going to be trying to do. I looked at South Mountain Company on Martha's Vineyard, which is an employee-owned design build company. They have about 35 employees, 20 of which are owners. I looked at Equal Exchange, a fair trade coffee and chocolate company. They have 80 some employees and about $50 million a year in sales. And then I looked at Real Pickles as well, because Real Pickles is a starting company, and they recently made that transition from employee-owned from family-owned to employee-owned, and trying to look at what the similarities were there in those companies and how it would tie in with this new organization. And I realized it wasn't really a fit. So I started looking at ESOPs. ESOPs stand for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And in that, it's a step kind of off to the side of a worker cooperative. With an ESOP, the employees still typically own the company. But in this case, it's through a trust. A trust owns the company. The employees have shares in that trust. And they get shares in a trust based on whatever qualifications that the company decides to go. Typically, it's length of time, level of responsibility, pay level. So there's different ways, just like a stock sharing plan with other companies. In this case, the retirement plan is all in that ESOP. But just like with a worker-owned cooperative, with ESOPs that are 100% employee-owned, the ownership of the company stays with the employees. So the decision-making and all of that power stays internally. And in comparing these two and looking through the companies, let me back up a second. On the ESOPs, I looked at a couple of different companies. I looked at King Arthur Flour and Springfield Remanufacturing Company in Springfield, Missouri. Both, again, have similarities to what this other company was doing. And in setting up all of these companies and looking at them and trying to decide what's the best way for this company to do it, all of these questions came to my mind. Are the employees ready? Are they ready for this transition? Do the employees want to do this transition? Do the owners want to do this transition? Are they all on the same page? And at looking at all of these questions and looking at all the similarities between them, the reason these companies were successful actually had very little to do with the ownership structure. It had to do with how the management of the company was set up before that transition. And if you go back to the beginning, I talked about managing yourself out of a job. And how do you do that? That's what these organizations had done before they had made the switch to employee ownership. The family ownership of the companies had set up the company in such a way that they didn't need to be there anymore. That their daily presence wasn't required to keep that wheel moving for the company. And so I came up with this definition of, how do you know when you're ready to make that transition? Or how do you know if you have a sustainable organization that can outlast you and that can move forward? And you'll know you've succeeded when the ongoing operation of the company no longer depends on you. Thank you. And I felt that was like this aha moment and also kind of anticlimactic. So wait, I did all of this research on employee co-op-owned companies and ESOPs, and it really doesn't matter what the structure is if you're not set up for the employees to take over. It doesn't matter. At that point, it's just a matter of paperwork. And for myself personally, not just for ownership of the company, but for managing my own work and at my own place of employment, that strategy is how can I set it up where I'm not needed to do the work? Because that doesn't mean they're going to fire me, I hope. My boss is back there, is why I say that. But it means that I'd be freed up to go take on other tasks and take on other duties. And if I'm setting up the employees around me for success and that they can move up and take on the responsibilities I am, it's the same way. They're ready for more, and then someone else can take on their responsibilities, and that spreads throughout the company. And so now, to wrap it all up, the most important part of all of this is that thing about people. And for me, I want to be in a place, and I'm thankful I am, and I want to continue to be in a place where they realize that the people are the most important part of the business. And if you treat them that way and you give them the training to take over the business, it's going to lead you to great success. Because this is my better way.